Have you ever felt like you weren't alone at home? That something invisible was watching you in the middle of the night? Maybe it was an unexpected chill, a whisper in the darkness, or that feeling that someone is right there, but when you look, there's nothing. What if I told you that there was a way to know if there was really something there? In this story, I'll tell you how one simple decision changed everything, and how a cat could be the only thing standing between you and the unknown. But be careful. After hearing this, you will never look at your room the same way again. My name is José de la Corte, and as strange as it may seem, I have always gotten along well with death. Since I was 22 years old, I have worked as a gravedigger in the Victoria Cemetery, an old place full of stories that almost no one cares to tell. Now, at 56 years old, I know every tombstone, every crooked tree, and every shadowy corner of that place better than I know my own house. I was never afraid of the dead. In fact, the silence of the cemetery has always brought me more peace than the restless noise of the living. While many people avoid going there after dark, I always made my rounds without thinking twice. But as much as I never believed in those ghost things, sometimes I heard things. There was no haunting coming out of the tomb or terrifying apparitions. They were small, subtle signs, as if I wasn't as alone as I imagined. Some nights, as I walked among the tombs, I had the distinct feeling that there were more footsteps echoing than mine. Other times, an icy chill ran down my spine, as if someone was watching me from afar, hidden among the tombstones. The worst thing was the whispers. Low, muffled sounds coming from the middle of the empty cemetery. At first, I thought it was something in my head, or the echo of the surrounding city. But even when there was no wind, when the night was completely still, the whispers continued. I never saw anything. Nothing concrete ever happened, just sounds and sensations. But that was about to change, and change in the worst way possible. Being a gravedigger never made me much money, but it was enough to live on. For 30 years, I lived in a simple house a few blocks from the cemetery, where I spent a good part of my life burying the dead and taking care of forgotten tombs. My routine was peaceful. I worked during the day, did my rounds at night, came home, ate something simple and slept. My house has always been small but comfortable. A bedroom, a modest living room, a kitchen and a bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it was everything I needed. In the back, a cramped backyard with an old wooden table and some chairs. On cooler days, I like to sit there and drink a coffee, listening to the silence of the night. Little did I know that that silence would soon be broken. The rent was always reasonable, and living close to the cemetery saved me time and money on transportation. But as the years went by, things started to change. The neighborhood, previously forgotten, began to fill with modern buildings. And with that, the rent, which had always been stable, started to rise. At first, it was a small increase here, another there, until one day I received the worst news possible. The property owner wanted to sell the house. He gave me two options: buy the place for an absurd price, completely out of my reach, or leave in 3 months. I tried to talk, explain that I was an old tenant, that I had never been late on rent, that I couldn't afford to buy. But he was direct. He wanted to sell, and there seemed to already be interested buyers. I had no choice. I needed to find a new place to live, but this was not easy at all. With my tight budget, the options were few. I spent weeks looking, visiting houses that were too small, too expensive, or falling apart. Some were far from the cemetery, which meant spending money on transportation, something I wanted to avoid at all costs. There was a house that I almost rented. It was small, but the price was good, and it was an acceptable distance from my work. However, as soon as I entered, I was greeted by a strong, musty smell and saw the walls covered in damp. I left on time. Time passed quickly. I was already in. The second month of searching and still nothing. The pressure increased every day. Until by chance, I saw a discreet advertisement in the local newspaper. House for rent, spacious, well located and affordable. If interested, call the number below. I didn't think twice. I picked up the phone and called. The voice on the other end of the line was that of a lady, tired, bluntly. "Do you want to rent the house?" "Yes, I saw the ad and was interested." She sighed as if hesitant. "I can show you this afternoon. Come after 3. I took a bus, and 20 minutes later, I got off in a neighborhood I had never seen before. The streets were wide, with few houses and a silence that I immediately liked. The place seemed peaceful. Maybe that was my new home. When I arrived at the address, I found an old but well-kept house. The exposed brick walls gave it a rustic feel, and the backyard was spacious, surrounded by a slightly rusty iron gate. At the entrance, Donna Marlene was already waiting for me. She was a fragile-looking woman, with gray hair tied in a tight bun and deep-set eyes, as if she were always tired. "You can come in," she said, opening the door. The interior of the house was simple but welcoming. The room was large, with a dark wooden floor that creaked underfoot, and large windows that let in plenty of light. The kitchen was small but functional. Through the hallway, you could see the bedrooms, and in the back, a backyard surrounded by high walls. But one detail caught my attention, a door at the end of the corridor. "Where does this door lead?" I asked. Donna Marlene hesitated before responding. "To the basement." I looked at the door for a few seconds. It was not common to find houses with basements in that region. "May I take a look at it?" She shook her head quickly. "There's nothing. There, just old things I left behind. Don't worry about that." The way she avoided the subject made me curious, but I didn't pursue it. After all, the house was perfect for me, and the price was within my budget. There was no point in missing this chance because of a locked basement. I closed the contract that same day. When the 3rd month of notice was up, I left my old home behind. The move was quick and hassle-free. As I didn't have much furniture, a small truck was enough to carry everything. I spent a few hours organizing things, and at the end of the day, I felt enormous relief. After so much stress looking for a place to live, I finally had a home to call my own. The first night was peaceful. No strange noises, no objects out of place. Just a weird feeling, nothing I could explain, just a subtle discomfort. But I ignored it and went to sleep. The tiredness of the change overcame me, and I passed out as soon as my head hit the pillow. In the first few days, everything seemed normal, but little by little, I started to notice little things, subtle details. But together they created a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. I felt constantly watched. At first, I tried to ignore it. After, all old houses always make strange noises. Maybe it was just my mind adjusting to the new environment, but then the ringing started. On the 3rd night, I woke up suddenly. The room was cold, much colder than it should be on an average night, and that's when everything started to change. The street light outside cast long shadows on the bedroom walls. I took a deep breath, trying to understand what had woken me up. It was then that I felt a slight tug on the sheets. My body went rigid. I stood completely still, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe I had moved the sheet without realizing it. Maybe it was just a strange dream, that strange feeling you get when you're between sleep and reality. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the uneasiness. But just as I was about to sleep again, the sheets were pulled back again. This time with more force. My heart raced. I held the fabric with shaking hands and stood there waiting. The room was immersed in a suffocating silence, broken only by my rapid breathing, and then I felt something that made my blood run cold. Cold fingers brushed my foot. I jumped out of bed with a start, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt around, in the dark, until I found the switch. With a snap, yellowish light flooded the room. Nothing. I looked around, trying to find some logical explanation. I bent down and looked under the bed. I opened the closet. I searched every corner. Nothing. But one thing was certain. I was not alone in that house. The next night, still troubled by what happened, I tried to ignore that feeling that there was something there. I lay down and closed my eyes, determined to sleep. But then, the noises started. I was about to fall asleep when I heard a sound coming from the kitchen. Touch, touch, touch. It was as if someone was tapping the wood of the table. My entire body shivered. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the wood creaking from the change in temperature. But the ringing got louder. Touch, 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 and then the sound of a chair being dragged. My heart raced. It was no longer possible to deny it. Someone or something was in my kitchen. I swallowed hard and remained still, holding my breath. I listened carefully, waiting for another sound, but after a few moments, everything became silent again. Only now it was a different silence. Heavy, dense, like something was there watching me, just waiting. I was paralyzed. For minutes, I didn't have the courage to leave the room. Something inside me screamed that if I opened that door, I would see something I would never forget. So I did the only thing that felt safe. I waited. I waited for dawn. I waited for the night to end. I waited for everything to be just a nightmare. But it wasn't. The following nights brought even worse things. Now, in addition to the ringing in the kitchen and the strange cold, footsteps began in the hallway. At first it was subtle. I was lying down, eyes heavy, almost asleep, when I heard it. Steps, slow, dragged away. They came from the end of the hallway, outside my room, the sound of bare feet touching the wood of the floor. I held my breath. Each step was cautious, hesitant, as if someone were coming toward my door. Slowly, very slowly. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The floor creaked under an invisible weight, and then silence. I lay there, completely still, waiting. I felt it. There was something there. That's when, as if to test me, the doorknob slowly turned. The door was locked, but still she moved. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. A shiver ran up my spine. I wanted to get up. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just stood there, suffocated by fear, watching the doorknob slowly return to its original position. And then, the footsteps began to move away, slowly crawling back down the hall. On the sixth night, everything got worse. They were no longer just noises. Now there was something in the room with me. I slept with the lamp on, trying to convince myself that it would keep me safe. But in the middle of the night, I woke up with a horrible feeling. There was something pressing on my chest. It was as if an invisible weight was crushing me, taking away my air. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move. The room was freezing, so I listened, one breath low, slow. Very close to my face. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see, but even against my will, my eyes moved, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, a dark, motionless figure. She had no face, it didn't have a defined shape, but I knew. She was watching me. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, it stayed there. And then, it moved. The weight on my chest disappeared. The room returned to normal, but I knew I wasn't safe. I would never be safe again. The following night, silence took over the house. No steps, no touching, no doors moving. But then, I heard something much worse. A voice, low, hoarse, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't be here." Dread paralyzed me. And in the corner of the room, the shadow moved again. It wasn't going to end there. In fact, it was just beginning. Now fear didn't wait for night to fall. He was with me the whole time. Even in daylight, I found myself looking around the corners of the house. hoping to see something that shouldn't be there. My body was always tense, my mind exhausted. But despite everything, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that maybe I just needed to sleep properly. Then he appeared. It was on the 8th night, the worst of all. I decided to go to bed earlier, thinking that if I got enough rest, my mind would stop playing tricks on me. But it didn't take long for it all to start again. First came the cold. An icy wind filled the room, the kind that chills you to the bone. But I knew the windows were closed. Then came the noises, the light touch on the sheet, the creaking of wood in the hallway, breathing muffled in some dark corner of the room. My body became paralyzed. I knew something was going to happen. I felt it, and then finally he appeared. I woke up with a start, my body feeling heavy, as if something was pinning me to the bed. My eyes slowly opened, and that's when I saw it. There, next to my bed, was a man sitting. The little light from the street lamp passed through the gap in the curtain, illuminating part of his silhouette. He was motionless, very close to me. My heart stopped. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. The man had a rigid posture, almost like a statue. He didn't move, but I knew he was looking at me. And then, without warning, he stood up. His movements were slow, drawn out, as if his bones were old and brittle. The room became smaller. The air is heavy. He stood there in front of my bed, standing still. The silence was absolute. Then he took a step forward. At that moment, my body finally reacted. On impulse, I threw myself back, getting as far away as I could. But when I blinked, he wasn't there anymore. The room was empty. Only I knew he was still there. I spent the rest of the night awake, not moving, not breathing properly, trying to understand what I had seen, or rather, who. The next morning, something changed. Before, I tried to make excuses for everything. The noises, the wind, the cold, the temperature, the steps, the old wood creaking. But there was no excuse for the man I saw in my room. I wasn't imagining things, and more than ever I knew I wasn't alone in that house. That's when I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to find out the truth. I started asking about the house. I talked to the neighbors, but no one knew anything. Some didn't even remember who had lived there before me. I tried to talk to Donna Marlene, the former owner, but she disappeared. The phone no longer worked. Nobody knew where she lived. It was as if she had never existed. So I started asking anyone who could help me. Friends, acquaintances, even at the cemetery, with the ladies who were going to take flowers to the graves. That's how I met Donna Lourdes, a nice lady who always visited her husband's grave. When I told her what was happening, she looked at me seriously and said, "You need a cat." I was surprised. A cat? Yes, my son. Cats see what we don't see. They absorb bad energy, ward off bad spirits. They are guardians between the two worlds. I've never been one to believe in these things, but at that moment, I would do anything to get rid of whatever was in that house, and that's how I adopted Morpheus. Morpheus was not a cat I chose. He was the one who chose me. When I walked into the animal shelter, he just walked up to me, sat at my feet, and stood there, as if to say, "It's you." The employee smiled. "This one has already decided. You have no choice." And I didn't. I took Morpheus home the same day. As soon as he crossed the door, he stopped in the middle of the room, pricked his ears, and stared down the hallway. His fur stood on end slightly, and he let out a low meow, almost a growl, as if challenging something. Invisible, he felt it. He knew. But unlike me, he wasn't afraid. Since Morpheus arrived, something has changed. The nights remained strange, but now there was a guardian between me and what haunted me. Every time the noises started, Morpheus would stand in the hallway, staring into the dark as if he saw something moving there. Sometimes his body would shrink, his fur would stand on end, and he would let out a low growl, the way cats do when they see an intruder. But the most bizarre, whenever he did this, the noises died down. One night I woke up to the sound of the doorknob moving, again. Only this time, before anything happened, Morpheus jumped on the bed, climbed onto my chest and faced me. His golden eyes were so fixed on mine that they seemed to want to tell me something. That's when I heard it. Heavy breathing coming from the hallway. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Morpheus's. The air became thick. I closed my eyes, my heart racing, expecting the worst, but after a few seconds, the sound disappeared. When I opened my eyes, Morpheus was still there, sitting on my chest, looking at the door. And then he meowed, loud, strong, as if he was expelling something from there. After that night, the phenomena subsided. I began to notice that Morpheus was absorbing the energy of the house. Sometimes he became restless, pacing from side to side, as if he were hunting something invisible. Other times, I would choose a specific corner and stay there for hours, eyes half closed, as if I was draining something I couldn't see. But the strangest thing, he started sleeping next to my bed every night, always facing the corridor, always in guard position. I was never superstitious, but after seeing Morpheus in action, I started thinking that maybe cats really do see what we can't see. And the scariest thing, one night, before going to sleep, I looked at Morpheus and noticed that he was fixed in a corner of the room, but he didn't seem scared. On the contrary, he seemed satisfied, as if saying, "I took care of this." The phenomena have not completely disappeared. There were still moments when a shiver would go up my spine out of nowhere. I still woke up sometimes feeling like I wasn't alone in the room. But now I had Morpheus, and for some reason that made me feel safe. I spent more than 30 years working in cemeteries. I have never seen ghosts wandering among the tombs. I have never felt cold hands pulling my foot in the middle of the night. But what did I see? What did I feel? It happened in my own home, and that's what taught me something important. Presences are not just where the dead rest. Sometimes they are where we least expect them. If one day you feel that there is something strange in your house, if the air gets cold, even with the windows closed, if doors move on their own, if shadows pass by the corner of your eyes, if you wake up feeling like someone is sitting on the edge of your bed, I have some advice for you. Adopt a cat. You don't have to believe me. Just take the test, choose a cat, take him home and watch. If there's something there, he'll know. And if you're lucky, he might even fight for you, just as Morpheus fought for me. If this story gave you goosebumps, imagine what else I have to tell you. So subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and get ready for more stories that will make you question everything around you. See you in the next video, if you still have the courage.